Imagine walking into a room full of Ivy League PhDs, people who have spent years mastering some of the toughest subjects in the world, and being handed a math problem that everyone says is impossible for you to solve. Now imagine that you're not a mathematician, not a genius, just a simple woman with no fancy degrees, but with a sharp mind and a quiet confidence. This is exactly what happened to her. At first, the experts laughed. They smirked and whispered, convinced that she'd never get anywhere near the answer. After all, she didn't have the same background, the same training, or the same credentials. The problem seemed designed to trip her up, to prove that she didn't belong in that intellectual arena. But what they didn't realize was that sometimes brilliance doesn't come from where you expect. Sometimes it comes from someone who just refuses to back down. In today's story, we dive into the moment when a simple woman faced off against the sharpest minds from top universities and stunned everyone by solving a math problem that was supposed to be beyond her reach. It's a tale about resilience, breaking stereotypes, and how knowledge isn't just for the elite, it's for anyone willing to think differently. But the real question is, how did she do it? What was her secret? And what happened to those Ivy League PhDs after she found the answer? Stay tuned, because this story is just getting started, and you won't want to miss what happens next. What led her to that moment wasn't luck or chance. She wasn't some accidental genius who stumbled upon the problem by mistake. No, her story began long before she walked into that room, surrounded by scholars who saw her as an outsider. She grew up in a small town, far from the bright lights of prestigious universities and expensive textbooks. School wasn't always easy for her. Math especially was something she had to work hard at. But she loved puzzles and problems, the kind that made her think differently. Over time, she developed her own way of understanding numbers and patterns, one that didn't rely on complicated formulas, but on simple logic and curiosity. When she was invited, or rather challenged, to solve the problem, it wasn't just about the math. It was about proving something much bigger. That knowledge and intelligence aren't tied to a degree or a title. The PhDs, experts in their fields, were convinced they had the upper hand. They threw around complex terms and theories, confident no one without their background could keep up. But she wasn't intimidated. Instead, she listened carefully, asked questions that seemed too simple at first, and slowly started breaking down the problem into parts that made sense to her. As the minutes passed, the atmosphere shifted. Whispers turned into silence. Eyes darted nervously. What was happening? How was this simple woman getting closer to the answer? The tension grew thicker. It wasn't just a math problem anymore. It was a challenge to everything they believed about intelligence and learning. But the story doesn't end here. What she discovered next wasn't just a solution to the problem. It was something that made everyone stop and rethink what they thought they knew. And that's where we pick up next. As she worked through the problem, the room seemed to change around her. The Ivy League experts, once so sure of themselves, started exchanging uneasy glances. Some whispered under their breath, others cleared their throats awkwardly. What they didn't expect was that her approach wasn't about memorizing formulas or reciting textbook answers. It was about seeing the problem from a fresh angle, one they hadn't considered. Among the crowd was a young professor known for his sharp criticism and quick judgment. He had openly mocked her when she first arrived, convinced she would embarrass herself. Now, as he watched her unravel the problem step by step, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. What was going on? How could someone with no formal training be challenging his years of study? Meanwhile, a few other scholars whispered about the possibility that this could change how they viewed intelligence and education. If this simple woman could solve what they thought was beyond reach, what else were they missing? Some worried it would shake the foundations of their carefully built reputations, while others quietly admired her determination. But the conflict wasn't just intellectual, it was personal. For her, this was more than a challenge or a test. It was about respect, about breaking down the barriers that separate people based on background and education. She felt the weight of every doubt thrown her way, every sneer and dismissal. Yet she kept going, fueled by a quiet strength and the belief that her voice, her way of thinking, mattered. The problem itself was tough, layers of complexity hidden beneath what looked like a simple equation. And just when it seemed like she was close to the answer, the room held its breath. What would happen next? Would she prove everyone wrong? Or would the pressure finally get to her? The tension was unbearable, and the story was far from over. The room grew quieter, the kind of silence that feels heavy with anticipation. Everyone's eyes were locked on her, watching as she carefully scribbled numbers and symbols, her fingers steady but her mind racing. Time seemed to slow down. The skeptics shifted uneasily in their seats, some biting their lips, others trying to hide the surprise flickering in their eyes. The challenge that had seemed so one-sided was suddenly anything but. The young professor who had mocked her earlier now leaned forward, his arms crossed but his gaze sharp, as if trying to catch any mistake. The others glanced at their notes, recalculating in their heads, struggling to reconcile what they thought was impossible with what was unfolding before them. The math problem, once a symbol of their superiority, was now a puzzle being unraveled in real time by someone they had underestimated. She paused, looking up briefly, meeting the eyes of those who doubted her. There was no arrogance in her gaze, just quiet determination. Her simple approach was breaking through layers of complexity, revealing the core of the problem in a way that felt almost too straightforward to be true. Yet, every step she took was precise, confident, and grounded in a deep understanding that didn't rely on fancy jargon or elite training. The tension was electric. Would this moment change everything they believed about expertise? Would it force the experts to rethink their assumptions? Or would it all come crashing down with a single misstep? The answer was just within reach, hanging in the air like a secret waiting to be revealed. And then, just as the clock ticked closer to the final seconds, something unexpected happened, something that would turn the whole story on its head. But you'll have to wait to find out what that was. Just when it seemed like the room was about to explode with surprise and admiration, an unexpected voice cut through the tension. One of the senior professors, a man known for his sharp intellect and strict adherence to tradition, stood up abruptly. His eyes were cold, and his tone carried a challenge. "Are you sure your solution holds under all conditions?" he asked, voice steady, but with an edge that hinted at disbelief. The simple woman looked up calmly, but didn't respond right away. Instead, she scanned the problem again, her mind racing. The room held its breath. Was this another layer to the puzzle? Had she overlooked something in the complexity? The stakes suddenly felt higher. This wasn't just a battle of wits anymore. It was a test of whether her entire approach could withstand scrutiny from the very experts who had doubted her. As she took a deep breath and began to explain her reasoning again, something surprising happened. The young professor who had mocked her before raised a question that wasn't just meant to trip her up. It was a genuine attempt to understand. Slowly, the dynamics shifted. The challenge grew from a one-sided confrontation to a complex debate. The simple woman wasn't just solving a math problem. She was holding a mirror up to the world of academia and its assumptions about intelligence and expertise. But just as the conversation deepened, a new complication arose. Someone in the back whispered something, an unexpected piece of information that threatened to upend everything. The problem might not be as straightforward as it seemed after all. The tension tightened like a coil ready to spring, and the room waited, caught between doubt and disbelief, as the story took a surprising turn. What came next would change everything. As the whispered information echoed through the room, she paused, eyes narrowing as she processed the new detail. It turned out the problem wasn't just a simple math question. It was part of a larger puzzle, one that had stumped even the brightest minds for years. But instead of freezing under the pressure, she leaned in closer. Her quiet confidence now burned brighter, fueled by a deep understanding that came from seeing the problem not as a mountain, but as a challenge to be broken down piece by piece. With calm determination, she started connecting the dots, weaving the newly revealed information into her solution. The experts watched in stunned silence as her approach unfolded, an elegant balance of logic and creativity, something that textbooks often overlooked. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but powerful. She laid out her answer, not just solving the original problem, but revealing insights that reshaped the entire question itself. The room erupted, some in disbelief, others in applause. The Ivy League PhDs, once so certain of their superiority, were now faced with undeniable proof that brilliance can come from anywhere. Respect replaced doubt, but just as the tension seemed to dissolve, she dropped the final twist. "This," she said, holding up her notes, "isn't just about math. It's about how we define knowledge and who gets to be called an expert. Maybe it's time we listen more, judge less, and remember that sometimes a simple perspective is the most powerful." A silence followed, heavy and thoughtful. The challenge was over, but the real conversation was just beginning. What would this mean for the world of academia, for those who had doubted her, and for everyone watching, wondering how many other simple voices have been overlooked all along? The story had ended, only to open a new chapter none of them expected. After that moment, the room slowly settled into a new kind of energy. The tension that had filled the air transformed into respect, real respect. The Ivy League PhDs who had once dismissed her now looked at her with admiration, realizing that intelligence isn't just about titles or degrees. It's about curiosity, persistence, and the courage to think differently. She didn't just solve a math problem, she challenged the very idea of what it means to be smart. The simple woman who had been mocked, underestimated, and overlooked became a symbol of something much bigger. Her story reminded everyone that knowledge isn't limited to a classroom or a certificate. It's something anyone can access with patience and open-mindedness. As she gathered her things and left the room, there was a feeling that things wouldn't be the same. The debate sparked by her solution had opened the door for a fresh perspective on education and expertise. People began to question old assumptions and realize the value of diverse thinking. Her journey wasn't about proving others wrong. It was about proving to herself that persistence matters, and that sometimes the greatest breakthroughs come from those who are willing to keep trying, even when the odds are stacked against them. For everyone watching, this story is a reminder. Never underestimate yourself or the power of a simple idea. Sometimes, the answers we seek are hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to see them. And who knows? Maybe the next person to surprise the world with an unexpected solution could be you. So remember, intelligence isn't a title, it's a mindset, and every challenge is an opportunity to grow.